Hello, my name is Erin Mayer, and I am your child's life science teacher for this quarter, first quarter, and for third quarter as well. I would also like to introduce David Lohndorf. He is a teacher candidate that's working with me from CU Boulder. Both of our contact information, emails, and then my phone number are down below, so feel free to contact us at any time. So these four words and the four corresponding pictures kind of sum up my philosophy about teaching that I've developed over the last 20 years that I've been teaching middle school science. So I truly believe people learn science by doing, by exploring, by collaborating, and sense making. And that is how I organize this class. I use the next generation science standards and the idea of three-dimensional learning to really provide us a focus and an overriding goal as we move throughout the year. Um, the graphic on the left side of the page shows the three dimensions that I am speaking of. So we have science and engineering practices. In the blue box, we have disciplinary core ideas in the orange box and cross-cutting concepts over in the green box. And we'll dig into those in a couple moments. So every single learning expedition, and that's my name for a unit, that we will do this year will begin with an anchoring phenomena. So a phenomena is basically just something that's puzzling that occurs in nature that we are trying to figure out and we can use science to explain. So for example, we are currently in our first learning expedition of the year called The Problem with Palm Oil. And one piece of our anchoring phenomena was this headline that you see on your screen: orangutans face complete extinction within 10 years, animal rescue charity warns. So after the kids collaboratively experience the phenomena, we ultimately develop what's called a driving question board, where we hone in kind of what our focus in the learning expedition will be, as well as figure out like what things do we need to learn in order to eventually be able to answer that question. So for this particular learning expedition, our driving question ended up being, how does changing an ecosystem affect what lives there? And as you can see on the screen, we have all the kids came up with all of these questions, and it was pretty easy to categorize them. So we have 6 categories of questions, and essentially what we'll be doing over the next few weeks is really digging into all these questions and figuring out like what can we do, what can we investigate, what can we learn about to come up with some really solid answers, and then how can we connect all the science that we're learning to ultimately develop a really good, strong, deep understanding of how does changing an ecosystem affect what lives there. So coming back to three-dimensional learning, the three dimensions really each have kind of a different area of focus. So the disciplinary core ideas are kind of what we think of when we think of like traditional teaching and standards. So these are ultimately like the science ideas that the kids are going to be figuring out. What's a little bit different with the way we do science teaching now are the implementation of cross-cutting concepts in science and engineering practices. So the science and engineering practices are basically just what the students are doing, how they're engaging with the information and with the ideas in order to make sense of the concepts that we're trying to figure out. The cross-cutting patterns are kind of the glue that winds and connects everything together. It's the way students can approach thinking about the ideas that we're learning about. So this is a really different kind of approach to learning than what probably most of us are used to from our school career. When I talk about what learning looks like in a three-dimensional focused classroom, I always like to use this graphic from George Couros because I think it does a really good job of like visually explaining what I mean. So traditionally, a lot of times when we hear the word learning, a lot of people just think this is what it looks like. It's a nice linear progression where you're trying to get from point A to point B, real straightforward path. When in actuality, that is not what learning looks like, and all the brain science, brain research kind of backs this up. So learning is a messy process, and there's lots of like turns and detours and stops on the way. And eventually you still get to that same place. It's just not as linear as we might believe. And so that's kind of what it sometimes looks like in the classroom as well, is that it's over the course of a few weeks that we are really building lots of ideas and getting them put together so that ultimately we can end up wherever our target is. I think with this type of learning environment, the way we address things is really important. So I'm very intentional in my words that I use with kids. Um, so the words on the right are what I intentionally use, and I avoid at all costs saying anything on the left. So kids aren't getting graded on things. They're getting assessed on their understandings. They're not getting scores. Again, it's an assessment. I try to move them from thinking about what grade did I get to what did I actually learn when I did this. From this is wrong to I am still working on this. It's all about feedback, which they will receive from both myself, Mr. Lohndorf, and each other, rather than like a criticism about their ideas. And again, the goal is to learn and achieve proficiency, not to get good grades. That will just happen as long as they're learning and achieving proficiency. And then finally, again, to focus on that learning, I always call things learning activities rather than assignments. I also think student ownership is really important in this process. So, again, we always have a purpose. There's always a reason why we do every single thing that we do in the classroom, virtual or face to face. We are mastery focused and we use the storyline to get there. So the kids are developing a story about something. Every single thing that they engage in, the purpose is to advance that story and their understanding of the story. Autonomy is really important, so I try to give kids as much choice as I can. And then I think of myself and Mr. Lohndorf more as facilitators of learning rather than the teacher and the holder of the knowledge. We're working together to help kids figure things out. So I want to spend just a brief moment in time talking about grading and feedback. So, like I said, I don't use the word grades, and I will never give kids a grade. I will always just provide them feedback. And I use something called a single point rubric. So they're either proficient or they're not proficient yet. Sometimes I'll say completed or not completed yet. The important word with this phrase of this three phrase word down here or three phrases is yet. So my expectation is that everybody will reach proficiency, and sometimes it just takes a couple tries, and that is completely fine. So anytime a student gets a not proficient yet or not completed yet, that just means there's still some learning to be done, and that they need to go back and revisit that particular learning activity, look at the feedback that they've been giving, and then go ahead and address that. I also like kids to reflect a lot on their learning. So they will always have a daily reflection where they think about what they did, what they learned, how they contributed to the sense making that the class is going through. That will happen every day. In this class, the students will also complete a weekly, what's called a claim evidence reasoning statement, and they will be evaluating their learning using this mastery learning scale that you see on the screen in front of you. As a middle school, Casey has decided that we will, as teachers, provide letter grades for students in Infinite Campus this year. And so I have kind of merged mastery learning with the idea of a letter grade. Every week, the students will evaluate their learning from the week before and determine where they fall on this mastery learning scale. And then as a result, what letter grade best reflects their learning. They will be making a claim about the letter grade that reflects their learning. They will be supporting that claim with evidence from at least 2 learning activities that we completed. And then they will be using reasoning to kind of explain how those learning activities really demonstrate their learning. I will be looking at those, and as long as they are doing a good job of providing evidence and reasoning to support their claim, then I will simply be one time a week adding that grade, and I'm going to quote grade, into Infinite Campus. At the end of the quarter, they will evaluate their entire quarter using a similar process and determine their overall grade for the quarter. Of course, in both of these situations, they will be discussing things with Mr. Lohndorf and I, and we'll be getting the okay before that goes into Infinite Campus. To wrap things up, we focus primarily on 2 different tools. or use two different tools to kind of facilitate learning. And this is the case whether we are in a virtual learning situation or a face-to-face situation. The first tool is Schoology, and the second tool is Seesaw. I am going to create a separate video because this one's getting a little bit long that kind of walks through how I organize our course in Schoology and how you can access it from a parent perspective and the resources that Schoology offers you to really get a good feeling and handle on what your child is doing in class. And Seesaw, I will also be sending you some information as well. So both of these tools you can really use to support your child's learning journey. Down in the screen here is a link to a presentation, and I will also include this in an email I sent to you. Seesaw, really quickly, some of you may have experienced this either in sixth grade or in previous years in elementary school. Seesaw is essentially a digital journal, and so that's a tool that we're using once a week for students to reflect on their learning in class. So thank you for sticking with me for this video. Again, feel free to reach out to me at any point in time, text or email if you have any questions, and I am looking forward to a fabulous year.